Adana Okafor was 47 years old when she declared war on time. She was a woman who had everything the modern Nigerian woman was supposed to want. A successful husband who owned 3 hotels across Lagos and Abuja, a daughter studying medicine at the University of Ibadan, a son preparing for his final year in secondary school, a house in Ikoyi with marble floors, and a swimming pool that sparkled like a sapphire in the sun. She drove a white Range Rover, belonged to the right clubs, attended the right churches, and wore the kind of clothes that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. But none of these achievements could protect her from what she saw that Tuesday morning in March, when the bathroom light hit her face at just the wrong angle, or perhaps the first time at just the right angle, revealing what she had been trying not to see for months. The fine lines around her eyes had deepened into creases. The smooth planes of her cheeks had begun to sag ever so slightly, pulled down by gravity's patient insistence. Her jawline, once sharp enough to cut through doubt, had softened, blurred, become negotiable rather than definitive. Adana stood frozen before that mirror, her hand halfway to her face, afraid to touch what she was seeing, as if touching would make it more real. She was wearing her silk nightgown, the expensive one her husband Emeka had brought back from his last business trip to Dubai, and suddenly she felt like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes, pretending to be sophisticated while time laughed at the performance. This is the moment that changes everything in our story, the fulcrum upon which a life pivots from one trajectory to another. But to understand why this moment broke Adana in a way that 1,000 other challenges had not, we must go back further still, to the wound that was planted in her childhood and finally bloomed into poison all these years later. Adana's mother, Ezen, had been a great beauty in her youth. The photographs proved it, a woman with skin like polished ebony, eyes that could launch ships or sink them with a glance, bone structure that belonged in museums. But Ezen had also been a woman who believed that beauty was currency, and like all currency, it could be spent, saved, or squandered. She had spent hers wisely, trading it for a husband from a wealthy family, for a comfortable life, for status in their community in Enugu. But then, as happens to all of us if we live long enough, Ezen's beauty began to fade. And with each line that appeared on her face, each strand of gray that crept into her hair, Ezen became more bitter, more desperate, more convinced that she was losing the only thing that had ever given her value. Young Adana, watching her mother's slow unraveling, learned a terrible lesson, that a woman's worth is written on her face, and when that face begins to change, her worth drains away like water through cupped hands, no matter how tightly you try to hold it. A woman who lets herself go, Ezen would say, studying her reflection with the intensity of a general surveying a losing battlefield, is a woman who deserves what she gets. Men are visual creatures. You must always remember that. The day you stop looking beautiful is the day you become invisible. Adana, 13 years old and watching her mother apply cream after cream, potion after potion, absorbing this philosophy like roots absorbing water, asked a question that would haunt her for decades. Mama, what if you cannot stop it? What if time is stronger than cream? Ezen had turned to look at her daughter with eyes that held more fear than wisdom, and said words that would echo across 34 years. Then you must find something stronger than time. Now, standing in her Ikoyi bathroom with its imported tiles and designer fixtures, 47-year-old Adana finally understood what her mother had meant. And because we are creatures who repeat the patterns we inherit unless we consciously break them, because trauma handed down through generations gains momentum like a stone rolling downhill, Adana decided that she would not go gently into the aging that awaited her. She would fight. She would find something stronger than time. She would go to Dr. Okonkwo. Dr. Chidi Okonkwo's clinic was not in Nigeria. It was in a gleaming glass building in Dubai, in the part of the city where wealth accumulates so densely it bends reality around itself, where the laws of nature seem negotiable for those who can afford to negotiate. The clinic's website showed before and after photos that seemed to defy physics. Women in their 50s who looked 30, faces that time had apparently decided to leave alone out of respect for Dr. Okonkwo's skill. But what drew Adana to this particular doctor, out of the hundreds who advertised similar miracles, was something he said in an interview she found online. The interviewer had asked him about the ethics of cosmetic surgery, about whether it was right to promise people eternal youth. Dr. Okonkwo had smiled, a smile that managed to be both warm and calculating, and said something that struck Adana like a bell ringing in a silent room. "I do not promise eternal youth," he said, his voice carrying the accent of someone who had been educated in London, but never quite lost a Nigerian rhythm beneath. "I promise what is better than youth. I promise that time will forget you exist. I have developed a technique, a proprietary method that does not simply pull back the skin or fill in the wrinkles. It restructures the face at a cellular level, teaching your own body to maintain itself as it was at your peak. It is not surgery. It is reprogramming. And once reprogrammed, the face simply stops aging in any visible way." The interviewer, skeptical as journalists are trained to be, pushed back. "That sounds too good to be true. That sounds like something that cannot exist within the laws of biology." Dr. Okonkwo's smile had widened, and in Adana saw not arrogance but certainty, the kind of certainty that comes from knowledge that others do not possess. 500 years ago, if you told someone that we could speak to people on the other side of the world through a device in our pocket, or that we could fly through the air in metal machines, or that we could replace a failing heart with a new one, they would have said the same thing. The laws of biology are not fixed. They are simply boundaries we have not yet learned to cross. I have learned to cross this one. Looking back, as we always do from the safe distance of hindsight, Adana would recognize all the warning signs that she ignored in that moment. The vagueness about the proprietary method, the grandiose claims that no legitimate doctor would make, the way he positioned himself not as a medical professional bound by ethics and evidence, but as a pioneer beyond such mundane concerns. But when you're desperate to believe something, when you need it to be true with the kind of need that overrides reason, you do not look for warning signs. You look for permission to believe. Adana contacted the clinic that very day. The consultation was expensive, $5,000 just to sit across from Dr. Okonkwo and discuss whether she was a suitable candidate for his revolutionary treatment. But money, Adana reasoned, was something she had. Time was something she did not have, or rather, time was something she could not afford to have. Not if it meant aging, fading, becoming invisible the way her mother had. She told her husband she was going to Dubai for a shopping trip with her friends. Emeka, busy with his hotels and his own concerns, barely looked up from his laptop when she mentioned it. Their marriage had become one of those comfortable arrangements where both parties had stopped paying close attention to the other, where "I love you" was something set out of habit rather than examined conviction. He transferred money to her account without asking how much she needed, and Adana felt a small stab of something like guilt, but also resentment. If he had paid more attention, if he had noticed the way he used to notice her, perhaps she would not need to do this. This is how we justify the choices that will destroy us. You see, we build elaborate explanations, complex narratives, assign blame to others for the decisions we make ourselves. Adana was choosing this path, but in her mind, the world had forced her onto it, left her no other option. And when we convince ourselves we have no choice, we stop asking whether we should make that choice at all. The flight to Dubai took 6 hours. Adana spent it looking at pictures on her phone. Pictures from 20 years ago when her face had been smooth and tight, when the mirror had been a friend rather than an enemy. She studied those old photographs the way a monk studies scripture, trying to memorize every line and curve, try to hold on to the memory of who she used to be so she could explain to Dr. Okonkwo exactly who she wanted to become again. The clinic itself was everything the website had promised. Sterile elegance, staff who moved with choreographed efficiency, waiting room filled with women of a certain age who all carried the same look of determined hope. Adana sat among them, these women from Nigeria, from Saudi Arabia, from India and China and Russia, women who spoke different languages but shared the same desperation, the same refusal to accept what time had written on their faces. When Dr. Okonkwo finally entered consultation room, Adana was struck by two things. First, that he looked younger than she had expected, perhaps in his late 40s, but with the kind of ageless quality that could have meant anything from 35 to 60. And second, that there was something slightly off about his face, though she could not quite identify what. It was too smooth, perhaps, or too still, as if the muscles beneath the skin had forgotten how to move in the full range of human expression. His smile, when it came, seemed painted on rather than felt. "Mrs. Okafor," he said, and his voice was warm even if his face was not. "Thank you for coming such a long way. Tell me, What do you see when you look in the mirror? It was a strange way to begin a medical consultation, but Adana found herself answering honestly, more honestly than she had intended. She told him about her mother, about the fear she had carried since childhood, about the morning when the bathroom light had shown her what she was becoming. She told him about her daughter, 21 years old and luminously beautiful, and how looking at her daughter's face was like looking at a prophecy of everything Adana was losing. She told him, voice breaking, that she felt as if she was disappearing, fading, becoming a ghost in her own life. Dr. Okonkwo listened with what seemed like genuine compassion, nodding at appropriate moments, making small sounds of understanding. When Adana finally finished, emptied of words and feeling exposed in a way that was both uncomfortable and necessary, he leaned forward and said something that sealed her fate. "You are not losing yourself, Mrs. Okafor. You are simply losing the physical expression of yourself. Your soul, your essence, your true self remains unchanged. What I offer is the ability to make your outer self match your inner self again. You still feel 47 inside, but you look 60. This is the tragedy of aging, this disconnect between how we feel and how we appear. I can fix that disconnect. I can make your face tell the truth about who you really are." It was a seductive argument, beautifully constructed, hitting every psychological button that decades of insecurity had installed in Adana's mind. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. And so she did. "How much?" she asked, and her voice was steady now, decided. $250,000, Dr. Okonkwo said, as casually as if he were naming the price of a handbag rather than a complete facial reconstruction. "But I must warn you, Mrs. Okafor, this is not reversible. Once we reprogram your facial cells, they will maintain that programming forever. You cannot change your mind later and decide to age naturally. You will look the way we make you look for the rest of your life, however long that may be." "Forever young," Adana said, and she meant it to sound like a question, but it came out as a prayer. "Forever preserved," Dr. Okonkwo corrected, and there was something in the way he said it, some emphasis on preserved rather than young, that should have made Adana pause, question, reconsider. But she was already reaching for her purse, already pulling out the credit card that would change everything, already signing the papers that promised her the only thing she thought she wanted, the face that time would forget. The surgery was scheduled for 3 days later, giving Adana just enough time to complete the required medical tests and for Dr. Okonkwo's team to map her face in 3 dimensions, creating a digital model of what they called her optimal aesthetic configuration. They used lasers and cameras and instruments that looked more like something from a science fiction film than a medical facility, all while explaining very little about what they were actually doing. The less you understand about the technical details, Dr. Okonkwo's lead technician told her with a smile that was probably meant to be reassuring, the less anxiety you will feel. Trust is more healing than knowledge in these situations. But here's what they did tell her, what they made her sign endless waivers acknowledging she understood. The procedure would take 16 hours. She would be under general anesthesia the entire time. They would not be cutting and pulling the way traditional plastic surgery did, but rather injecting a proprietary compound into specific facial zones. This compound, according to the literature it provided, contained a combination of stem cells, peptides, and what they called cellular memory agents that would instruct her facial cells to maintain a specific configuration indefinitely. Think of it like installing new software in a computer. Dr. Okonkwo explained during their final preoperative meeting, "Your face is the hardware, and we are giving it new instructions about how to run. Instead of following the natural program of aging, it will follow our program of preservation." The night before the surgery, Adana lay in her hotel room, unable to sleep. The Dubai skyline glittered outside her window, all those impossible buildings thrusting into the sky, as if to prove that humanity could overcome any limitation, even gravity itself. If we can build towers that touch clouds, she thought, surely we can tell our faces to stop aging. She called home. Her husband answered on the 5th ring, his voice distracted. "Adana, how's the shopping? Have you bought out all of Dubai yet?" He laughed at his own joke, not noticing that she did not laugh with him. "I miss you," she said, and meant it more than she had in years. Suddenly, lying there in that sterile hotel room 12 hours before someone would cut open her face and reprogram it. She wanted nothing more than to be home, to be lying next to her husband's familiar warmth, to see her children's faces, to sit in her garden and drink tea and just accept that she was getting older and that this was not a tragedy, but simply the human condition, the price we pay for the privilege of living. "I miss you too," Emeka said, but his voice held the abstracted quality of someone saying what they're supposed to say while thinking about something else entirely. "Did you find that handbag you wanted?" And just like that, the moment of doubt passed. Adana's resolve hardened again. "He does not even really see me," she thought. "He does not notice whether I am there or not, whether I am young or old, whether I am fading or vibrant." The surgery was not just about preserving her face. It was about forcing the world to notice her again, to see her, to acknowledge that she existed and mattered and was worth looking at. "Yes," she lied. "I found exactly what I was looking for." The surgery began at 6 in the morning. Adana remembered the anesthesiologist placing the mask over her face, remembered counting backwards from 10, remembered reaching 7 before the world dissolved into chemical darkness. What she did not remember, could never remember, were the 16 hours that followed, the hours when Dr. Okonkwo and his team worked on her face with their needles and their compounds and their proprietary method that they guarded like a state secret. If she could have seen what they did, if she could have watched from outside her sedated body, she would have seen this. Dr. Okonkwo injecting a thick, opalescent fluid into 17 specific points on her face, each injection taking 30 minutes as the compound slowly diffused through the tissue. She would have seen him checking readings on a computer screen, adjusting concentrations, making calculations that seemed more like alchemy than medicine. She would have seen him pause once, frown at something he saw in the data, confer quietly with his assistant, and then continue with a small adjustment to the formula. She would have seen, in other words, that this was not the perfected science he had advertised, but something still experimental, still uncertain, still being refined on the faces of women desperate enough to pay for the privilege of being test subjects. But Adana saw none of this. She floated in pharmaceutical oblivion while the map of her face was rewritten according to someone else's algorithm, her cells receiving instructions in a language they had never evolved to understand. When she woke, 18 hours after she had gone under, her face was wrapped in bandages so thick she could barely see. The pain was extraordinary, different from any pain she had experienced before. It was not sharp or localized, but rather a deep ache that seemed to radiate from her bones, as if her skull itself was protesting what had been done to the flesh that covered it. "The pain is normal," a nurse assured her, injecting something into her for that made the world soft and distant again. "You have been restructured at the cellular level. Your face is learning to be something new. Of course there is discomfort. Growing pains, we call them, even though technically you are not growing but preserving." The nurse laughed at this, as if it were a joke they made often, and Adana wanted to ask what exactly that meant, what the difference was between growing and preserving. But the medication pulled her down into sleep before the words could form. She stayed in Dubai for 3 weeks, as required by the post-operative protocols. Every 3 days, they unwrapped portions of her face to check the healing, but they never let her look in a mirror. Not yet, Dr. Okonkwo would say, examining her with instruments and satisfied expressions. The final result takes 4 weeks to stabilize. Looking before then will only frighten you. The intermediate stages are not beautiful. You must trust the process. Trust the process. It became a mantra they repeated every time Adana asked questions, every time she expressed concern about the strange sensations in her face, the feeling that her skin was too tight and too loose at the same time, that something underneath was not quite sitting right on the bone. Finally, on the morning of her departure, they removed all the bandages and led her to a full-length mirror. Dr. Okonkwo stood beside her, his hand hovering near her elbow as if ready to catch her should she faint. "Are you ready?" he asked, and Adana nodded, because what else could she do? She had paid a fortune, endured weeks of pain, and she was about to see whether it had been worth it. He stepped aside, and Adana saw her face for the first time in 3 weeks. The woman in the mirror was not her, but also unmistakably her. It was her face, but as it had been 20 years ago, smooth and tight and unmarked by time. The lines around her eyes had vanished. Her cheeks were high and full. Her jawline was sharp enough to cut diamonds. Her skin glowed with an almost luminous quality, as if lit from within. She looked 30, perhaps even younger. She looked like her daughter's older sister rather than her mother. She looked, in other words, exactly like what she had paid for, what she had dreamed of, what she had thought would solve everything that felt wrong in her life. "It is perfect," she whispered, and Dr. Okonkwo smiled his painted smile and agreed. "Yes," he said, "it is exactly as we planned. Your face will maintain this appearance indefinitely. Time has forgotten you exist, Mrs. Okafor. Welcome to the rest of your ageless life." There should have been trumpets. There should have been choruses of angels. There should have been some cosmic acknowledgement that a miracle had occurred. Instead, there was just a clinic room in Dubai, a doctor who looked pleased with his work, and a woman staring at a face that was hers, but also not hers, feeling something she could not name but that sat in her stomach like a stone. "How long?" she asked. "How long will it last?" Dr. Okonkwo's smile widened. "Forever, Mrs. Okafor. That is the point. Your cells have been reprogrammed. They will maintain this state until you die, whether that is in 1 year or 50 years. You will look exactly as you look right now for the rest of your life." He said it like a promise, like the answer to prayers, like the greatest gift one human could give another. But standing there, looking at her impossibly young face in that mirror, Adana felt the first cold finger of doubt traced down her spine. Forever is a very long time to be locked into a single moment, a single version of yourself. Forever is a very long time to wear a face that does not change, does not respond to life, does not show the map of where you've been and what you have survived. But she pushed the doubt away, blamed it on the residual effects of the anesthesia, the stress of recovery, the strangeness of seeing such a dramatic change. She flew home to Lagos with her new face, ready to reveal her miracle to a world that would surely celebrate her victory over time. She had no way of knowing that the celebration would last exactly 4 months and 11 days, and then her face would begin to betray her in ways that would make aging look like mercy. Emeka did not recognize her at the airport. Adana stood directly in front of him at the arrivals terminal, and her husband of 26 years looked past her, his eyes searching the crowd for a woman who looked older, looked familiar, looked like his wife. It was only when she spoke his name that he focused on her, and the expression that crossed his face was not joy or amazement, but something closer to horror. "Adana," he said, the question mark heavy in his voice. "What have you done?" It was not the reunion she had imagined. In her fantasies, he would be stunned into silence by her transformation, would fall in love with her all over again, would see her the way he had seen her when they first met at university, when she had been 22 and he had been 23, and the world had seemed full of possibility. Instead, he stood there looking at her with an expression that mixed confusion, concern, and something that looked disturbingly like disappointment. "I had a procedure," Adana said, trying to keep her voice light, celebratory. "In Dubai, Dr. Okonkwo. He is the best in the world. Look at me, Emeka. Really look at me." Her husband looked, and the longer he looked, the more troubled his expression became. "You look like you are 25 years old," he finally said. "You look younger than our daughter. It is unsettling, Adana. It does not look natural." "It is not supposed to look natural," she snapped, feeling the first stirrings of anger. "It is supposed to look perfect. I did this for us, for our marriage. So you would see me again, really see me, the way you used to." Emeka opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, seeming to think better of whatever he had been about to say. He picked up her luggage instead, and they walked to the car in silence, a silence that felt like a preview of all the silences that would fill their house in the coming months. Her children's reactions were even worse. Her daughter, Amara, home from university for weekend, took one look at her mother and burst into tears. "Mummy, what have you done to yourself? You do not look like Mummy anymore. You look like someone wearing a mummy mask." Her son, Chitty, 16 years old, and at that age where everything adults do is embarrassing, would barely look at her. "It is weird," was all he would say. "You look weird, Mum, like a wax figure or something." Adana had expected jealousy from her daughter, had expected her son to not notice or care the way teenage boys do not notice or care about such things. She had not expected rejection, had not expected her own family to look at her transformation as something grotesque rather than miraculous. "You will get used to it," she told herself. "It just takes time to adjust to change." But they did not adjust, and neither did anyone else. Her friends, when she met them at their regular Wednesday lunch, reacted with barely concealed shock. They complimented her, yes, told her she looked amazing, asked for Dr. Okonkwo's contact information, but their eyes held something she could not quite interpret. Later, she would understand that they were looking at her the way people look at accidents, unable to turn away but repulsed by what they saw. The members of her church were worse. The whispers started the first Sunday she attended after her return, spreading to the congregation like fire through dry grass. By the time the service ended, she had been approached by no fewer than 7 people asking if she was well, a Nigerian euphemism for asking if she had lost her mind. Pastor Adeyemi, a kindly man in his 60s who had counseled Adana and Emeka before their marriage and baptized both their children, asked her to stay after service. They sat in his office, a small room lined with theological books and smelling of old paper and furniture polish, and he regarded her with eyes that held more sadness than judgment. "Sister Adana," he began carefully, "I want to talk to you about what you have done to your face." "It is just cosmetic surgery, Pastor," Adana said defensively. "Many women do it. It is not a sin." "I did not say it was a sin," the pastor replied gently. "I said I want to talk about it. Do you know the story of Saul, who God rejected as king because he went to the witch of Endor seeking power over death and time?" Adana felt her face flush with anger. "I did not go to a witch, Pastor. I went to a doctor, a highly trained medical professional. This is science, not witchcraft. Science and witchcraft are not as different as we like to pretend," Pastor Adeyemi said, his voice still gentle but firm. "Both claim to give us power over the natural order. Both promise to make us more than we were created to be. The question is not whether the method is modern or ancient, but whether we are trying to usurp God's authority over our own bodies, over our own aging, over our own mortality." He paused, letting his words settle in the space between them, then continued. "You were a beautiful woman, Adana. You are still a beautiful woman. But now you are beautiful in a way that defies nature, that defies God's plan for how humans age and change and eventually return to dust. And when we defy nature, when we defy God, there are always consequences. I am worried about what those consequences might be." Adana stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Thank you for your concern, Pastor, but I am fine. More than fine. I feel better than I have in years. Maybe you are just uncomfortable because I have refused to accept aging the way your generation did. Maybe progress frightens you." She left before he could respond, but his words followed her like shadows, whispering doubts she did not want to hear. For the first month after her return, Adana tried to convince herself that she had made the right choice, that everyone else was simply jealous or old-fashioned or unable to appreciate what she had achieved. She spent hours in front of mirrors, studying her flawless face, looking for reassurance in its smooth perfection. She took hundreds of selfies, posting them on social media with hashtags about self-love and empowerment, carefully curating a narrative in which she was brave and bold, and everyone else was trapped in conventional thinking. But late at night, when Emeka turned his back to her in bed, when her daughter found excuses to not visit, when her friends' phone calls became less frequent, Adana would look at her face in the bathroom mirror and feel a growing unease. There was something not quite right about the way her skin reflected light, something slightly wrong about the way it moved when she smiled. It was too perfect, too still, too much like a mask and not enough like flesh. And then, for months, 11 days after the surgery, at her daughter's graduation ceremony from medical school, the first piece fell off. The fragment that detached from Adana's face was small, roughly the size of a Naira coin, irregular in shape, like a piece from a jigsaw puzzle. It was her own skin. There was no question about that. The exact shade of her complexion, but somehow disconnected, dead, dry as parchment. Where it had been, on the lower part of her right cheek, was an area of slightly lighter skin underneath, as if she were molting, as if whatever Dr. Okonkwo had done to preserve her face was beginning to fail in the most horrifying way possible. Amara, sitting beside her mother in the graduation hall, noticed a fragment fall and picked it up before she consciously registered what it was. When understanding hit, she let out a small gasp and grabbed her mother's arm. "Mummy, your face," she whispered urgently. "Something is wrong with your face." Adana's hand flew to her cheek, touching the spot where the skin had detached. The area felt strange, both numb and hypersensitive at the same time, and when she pressed gently, she felt something shift beneath the surface, as if there were layers separating, as if her face was delaminating like cheap plywood exposed to water. Terror, cold and absolute, flooded through her. She stood up abruptly, mumbling something about the bathroom, and fled the auditorium. One hand pressed to her face to hide the spot, the other clutching her purse. Behind her, she heard Amara calling her name, but she did not stop, could not stop, needed desperately to get somewhere private, somewhere with a mirror, somewhere she could see what was happening to her face. The bathroom mirror confirmed her worst fears. The area where the skin had detached was clearly visible, a pale patch about an inch across, surrounded by what looked like a dark line where her outer layer of skin was beginning to separate from the layer beneath. And it was not just that one spot. Now that she knew to look for it, she could see similar dark lines beginning to form around her eyes, along her jawline, at the corners of her mouth. Her face, her perfect preserved face, was coming apart. Adana's first coherent thought was to call Dr. Okonkwo. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and dialed a number for his clinic, only to get a recording saying the number was no longer in service. She tried the emergency contact he had given her, then the email address, becoming more frantic with each failed attempt to reach him. Finally, she managed to connect with someone at the clinic's main desk. The receptionist, speaking in that professionally pleasant voice that revealed nothing, informed her that Dr. Okonkwo was no longer with the facility, that he had moved his practice to an undisclosed location, and that patient records from his time at the clinic were confidential and could not be shared. "But I am his patient," Adana said, her voice rising toward hysteria. "He did a procedure on me, and something is going wrong. I need to speak with him immediately. This is an emergency." "I understand your concern, Mrs. Okafor," the receptionist said, and the use of her name, proof that they had her file, proof that they knew exactly who she was and what had been done to her, made the situation somehow more real and more terrifying. However, Dr. Okonkwo's work was experimental in nature, and patients were informed of the potential risks. "I can recommend some local cosmetic surgeons who might be able to help you, but I cannot put you in contact with Dr. Okonkwo directly." "Experimental?" Adana repeated, the word sticking in her throat. "He said it was perfected. He said my face would maintain its appearance forever." He said, "I am very sorry," the receptionist interrupted, not sounding sorry at all, "but I cannot discuss Dr. Okonkwo's specific claims or methodologies. Would you like the contact information for those local surgeons?" Adana ended the call without answering, her entire body trembling. Experimental. The procedure had been experimental, and she had been too desperate, too vain, too stupid to ask the right questions, to demand proof of safety, to consider that a man who promised miracles might be selling nightmares instead. She looked at her reflection again, and as she watched, frozen in horror, another small piece of skin began to lift at the edge, curling up slightly like paper exposed to flame. She touched it with one finger, and it came away entirely, leaving another pale patch beneath. Her face was disintegrating, and she had no idea how to stop it. The next 3 days were a blur of frantic consultations with every plastic surgeon and dermatologist in Lagos that Amara, now terrified for her mother and guilt-ridden for not stopping her from having the procedure in the first place, could find. Adana wore large sunglasses and a headscarf to each appointment, trying to hide what was happening to her face. But once the doctors examined her, there was no hiding anything. Their reactions ranged from clinical curiosity to barely concealed revulsion. Most had never seen anything like what was happening to Adana's face. The ones who were honest admitted they had no idea how to treat it. The ones who were dishonest offered expensive treatments they knew would not work, trying to profit from her desperation. Dr. Adelik, a plastic surgeon at Lagos University Teaching Hospital with 40 years of experience, was the first to give her something close to a real explanation. Mrs. Okafor, he said, his voice heavy with sadness that came from having seen too many cosmetic procedures go wrong. What was done to you was not standard plastic surgery. From what you have described and what I can observe, it sounds like some form of cellular modification, possibly using unauthorized compounds that have not been approved for human use in any legitimate medical jurisdiction. He paused, adjusting his glasses, as he studied the photographs that Dana had brought from before the procedure. The human face is not meant to be frozen at a particular age. Our skin regenerates constantly, old cells dying and new cells being born, responding to sun exposure, hormones, aging, stress, joy, sorrow. Every experience we have is written on our faces at a cellular level. What this Dr. Okonkwo appears to have done is interrupt that natural cycle, forcing your facial cells into a state of artificial stasis. But why is it falling apart now? Adana asked, her voice barely above a whisper. More pieces had come off since the graduation ceremony. She had taken to wearing heavy makeup to hide the pale patches, but the makeup would not adhere properly to the affected areas, creating a mottled, uneven appearance that was worse than the patches themselves. Dr. Adelik sighed deeply. Because stasis is not natural, Mrs. Okafor, nothing living is meant to remain unchanged. Your cells were probably fighting against the programming from the moment it was introduced. Now it seems they are simply giving up, dying en masse because they can no longer maintain the impossible state they were forced into. It is not unlike what happens with severe frostbite. The tissue dies because the conditions are incompatible with life. The room seemed to tilt around Adana. Are you saying my face is dying? I am saying that the surface layers of your facial tissue are undergoing accelerated necrosis. Yes, in layman's terms, they are dying and detaching from the viable tissue beneath. Can you stop it? Can you fix it? Desperation made her voice sharp, demanding, Doctor. Adelik's silence was answer enough, but he gave her words anyway. I can manage the symptoms. We can try to slow the progression with various topical treatments and systemic medications. We can perform debridement, removing the dead tissue as it separates, and eventually, once the process has run its course, we can discuss reconstructive options. But I cannot reverse what has been done to you. I cannot undo the cellular programming. That technology, if it even truly exists in control form, is beyond my expertise and, frankly, beyond medical ethics. He leaned forward, his eyes kind but honest. Mrs. Okafor, I need to be very direct with you. What you are experiencing may progress significantly before it stabilizes. You need to prepare yourself mentally and emotionally for the fact that your face may look very different from how it looks now before this is over. And you need to tell your family, bring them into this, let them support you. This is not something you can hide or manage alone. Adana left his office with prescriptions she barely understood and a terror she understood too well. The next morning, she woke to find that another large section of skin on her left cheek had detached overnight, along with smaller pieces around her mouth and near her hairline. The pale underlayer was now visible across perhaps 30% of her face, creating a mottled, patchwork appearance that no amount of makeup could disguise. She could not go out. She could not face the world looking like this. She called her husband's office and told his secretary that she was seriously ill and needed him to come home. When Emeka arrived 2 hours later, irritated at being pulled away from an important meeting, and saw what had happened to her face, his irritation transformed into something else entirely. Jesus Christ, Adana, he breathed, staring at her with undisguised horror. What is happening to you? And so she told him everything. The dissatisfaction with aging, the mother who had taught her that beauty was currency, the discovery of Dr. Okonkwo and his promises, the $250,000 she had secretly withdrawn from their joint accounts, the experimental procedure, the way her face had looked perfect for 4 months before beginning to disintegrate. She told him while standing in their living room, crying so hard she could barely speak, watching his expression cycle through shock and anger and grief and something that looked like mourning. When she finished, Emeka sat down heavily on the sofa, his face in his hands. For a long time, he said nothing. Adana stood before him, waiting for his judgment, knowing she deserved whatever anger he might express. Finally, he looked up at her, and his eyes were wet with tears. You spent $250,000, he said slowly, to fix something that was not broken. You risked your health, your life, for something I never asked you to do. Did you really think I cared about the lines on your face? Did you really think I loved you less because you were 47 instead of 27? You stopped seeing me, Adana whispered. You stopped looking at me the way you used to. I became invisible. I stopped seeing you because you stopped being present, Emeka replied, his voice breaking. You were so obsessed with aging, so consumed by what you saw in a mirror, that you were not there for our conversations, our life, our marriage. The problem was not your face, Adana. The problem was that you let fear of aging steal you away from us long before any wrinkle ever could. The truth of his words hit Adana like a physical blow. He was right. She had been so focused on preserving her appearance that she had stopped participating in her actual life. She had missed dinners distracted by skincare routines, had skipped family events to avoid photographs that might show her aging, had withdrawn from intimacy with her husband because she could not bear for him to see her body in harsh light. She had been disappearing, yes, but not because of aging. She had been disappearing because she had chosen to hide. Help me, she said, and it was both a plea and a prayer. Please, Emeka, I know I have been foolish. I know I have damaged our trust, our finances, everything. But please do not abandon me now. I am so frightened. Emeka stood and crossed to her, stopping just before her, studying her deteriorating face with an expression that mixed revulsion and love in equal measure. Then he pulled her carefully into his arms, mindful of her fragile skin, and held her while she sobbed against his chest. I am not going anywhere, he said quietly. We will face this together. Whatever happens to your face, you are still my wife. You are still Amara and Chitty's mother. You are still you. Underneath whatever is happening on the surface, we will get through this. But even as he said it, even as Adana allowed herself to feel the smallest measure of relief at not being abandoned, both of them understood that getting through this might mean something far more difficult than either was ready to face. Over the next 3 weeks, the deterioration accelerated. Large sections of Adana's facial skin detached and had to be removed by Dr. Adelik in increasingly frequent medical appointments that felt more like autopsies of her vanity than treatments. The pale underlayer that was revealed was not smooth new skin, as she had desperately hoped, but rather a strange, almost translucent tissue that looked more like plastic than flesh, marked with visible lines where Dr. Okonkwo had injected a proprietary compound. Her face, as the outer layer came off, began to look artificial, like a mannequin's face or a badly done wax figure. The preserved perfection that Dr. Okonkwo had created was not skin and muscle and natural tissue, but some kind of synthetic scaffolding that had been holding the shape while her actual face beneath had continued to age. Now that the outer layer was gone, what remained was neither young nor old, neither natural nor artificial, but something caught horribly in between. It is like he created a mask over your real face, Dr. Adelik explained during one particularly difficult appointment, using some kind of biosynthetic material that your body is finally rejecting. The good news, if we can call it that, is that beneath this layer, there appears to be actual viable tissue. Your real face still exists under what he built. The question is what condition it will be in when we finally reach it, and how much scarring there will be from this rejection process. Adana had stopped looking in mirrors. The woman she saw, there was not anyone she recognized, not the 47-year-old she had been before Dubai, not the 25-year-old she had appeared to be after the surgery, but some nightmare combination of both and neither. Her children could barely look at her. Amara, studying to be a doctor herself, forced herself to help with the daily wound care, but Adana could see the horror and pity in her daughter's eyes. Chitty, her son, had started spending most of his time at friend houses, unable to cope with his mother's transformation into something that frightened him. The worst part was not the physical pain, though that was considerable. The worst part was the isolation. Adana could not go out without people staring, pointing, whispering. Children cried when they saw her. Adults looked away quickly, embarrassed to be caught staring. She had become exactly what she had feared aging would make her, invisible. Except now she was invisible because people chose not to see her rather than because she had aged naturally into a kind of social relevance. She stopped going to church after Pastor Adeyemi visited her home and, with tears in his eyes, tried to perform what amounted to an exorcism, convinced that what was happening to her face was demonic rather than medical. She stopped seeing friends after one of them, Ngozi, told her bluntly that she looked like a corpse and maybe she should just stay home until whatever was happening had finished happening. The only person outside her immediate family who did not abandon her was Amara's friend from medical school, a young woman named Obioma, who specialized in dermatology and had a particular interest in the intersection of traditional African healing and modern medicine. Obioma came to the house regularly, bringing herbal treatments her grandmother had taught her, salves made from shea butter and neem, and other plants whose names Adana did not recognize. These will not reverse what has been done. Obioma explained as she gently applied a cool paste to Adana's face, the first touching weeks that did not carry judgment or revulsion. But they will help your real skin remember how to be skin when it finally emerges. They will support the healing process. Remind yourselves of their true nature rather than the false programming that was imposed on them. Do you think I am being punished? Adana asked one afternoon as Obioma worked on her face, her hands sure and gentle. Is this God's judgment on my vanity? Obioma was quiet for a moment, considering her answer carefully. I think the universe is neutral, Auntie, she finally said. I do not think you're being punished by God any more than I think Dr. Okonkwo was blessed by God when his experiments appear to work. What I think is that you made a choice based on fear, and that choice had consequences. Not divine consequences, just cause and effect. Like jumping from a height will cause you to fall. You cannot cheat nature, and when you try, nature eventually corrects the imbalance. She paused in her work, looking at Adana with eyes that held wisdom beyond her years. But I also think that sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the doors to our truest selves. This is not punishment. This is initiation. The question is, who will you be on the other side of it? The complete shedding took 6 more weeks. By the time it was done, by the time the last piece of synthetic mask Dr. Okonkwo had created finally detached and was removed, Adana's face was a ruin of scars and discolored patches where the underlying tissue had been damaged by the compounds and the rejection process. Dr. Adeli took photographs for his medical files, documenting what he called the most severe case of cosmetic procedure failure he had ever seen. We can do reconstructive surgery, he told Adana and Emeka at a consultation 3 months after the shedding was complete. Multiple procedures over the course of a year or more. We can improve the scarring significantly, restore some symmetry to your features, make you look more like you did before the initial procedure. Not exactly the same. Too much damage has been done for that, but better than you look now. Adana looked at the projected outcomes he showed her on his computer, digital simulations of what her face might look like after the reconstruction. The woman in those images was in her 50s, which Adana now was, having turned 50 during the months of her face's disintegration. The simulated face was scarred but healed, aged but dignified, marked by what had happened but not defined by it. How much? She asked, the same question that had started this nightmare. With multiple procedures, perhaps $80,000, Dr. Adeli said, we can arrange payment plans. Adana looked at her husband, saw the careful neutrality in his expression, the way he was leaving this decision entirely to her, offering neither pressure nor permission. She looked at the simulation again, at the possibility of restoration, of having a face that people could look at without flinching, a face that would allow her to move through the world without being a spectacle. Then she looked at her own reflection in the black screen of the turned-off television across from where she sat. Without the generous lighting and digital enhancement of the simulation, her face was shocking in its disfigurement. She looked like a burned victim, like someone who survived a terrible accident, like a woman who had been broken and badly repaired. No, she said quietly. No more surgery. Dr. Adeli blinked in surprise. Mrs. Okafor, I understand if you need time to think about it, but I should tell you that the longer we wait, the more the scars will set and the more difficult. I am not saying I need time, Adana interrupted, and there was a firmness in her voice she had not heard there in years. I am saying no more surgery, no more procedures, no more attempts to make my face into something it is not. This is my face now. This is what I chose, what I paid for, what I earned through my vanity and fear. And this is what I will live with. Emeka reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. Are you sure? He asked quietly. If this is about the money, we can find a way. If this is about being brave, you do not have to be. No one would blame you for wanting to fix this. Adana looked at her husband, really looked at him for the first time in what felt like years. She saw the gray in his hair that had not been there when they married, the lines around his eyes that marked decades of smiling and worrying and living, the slight softening of his jawline that time had created. She saw a man who had aged naturally while she had tried to stop time, and she saw that his aging had not made him less but more, had added character and depth and a kind of beauty that her preserved perfection had lacked. I am sure, she said. I am done running from time. I am done trying to look like someone I am not. This face tells the truth about what I have been through, about the price of vanity, about what happens when you try to cheat nature. It is a terrible truth, but it is my truth, and I will not hide it anymore. Learning to live with her disfigured face was not a single decision, but 1,000 small decisions every day. The decision to leave the house even though children stared and adults whispered. The decision to go to the market and negotiate for tomatoes while the seller tried not to look directly at her. The decision to attend church despite the uncomfortable silence that fell when she entered, despite the way people suddenly remembered they needed to be somewhere else when she approached. But something unexpected happened as Adana stopped trying to hide, stopped apologizing for her appearance, stopped living as if her face was a shameful secret that needed to be kept. People began to adjust. Not everyone, and not quickly, but gradually the whispers quieted. The stares became less frequent, and a few brave souls began to treat her as a person rather than tragedy. One of those souls was a young woman named Kayamika, who approached Adana at the market 6 months after the shedding was complete. Kayamika was perhaps 25, beautiful in that effortless way of the young, but her eyes held a desperation that Adana recognized immediately. "Excuse me, Ma," Kayamika said hesitantly. "I know this is strange, but are you the woman who had the surgery in Dubai? The one whose face—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence politely, but Adana understood what she was asking. "Yes," Adana said simply, "that is me." Kayamika's eyes filled with tears. "I have been saving money," she confessed in a rush. "I found a doctor in South Africa who does similar procedures, not as expensive as Dubai, and I was planning to go next month. But then I heard about you, about what happened, and I have been looking for you because I needed to see with my own eyes if it was true. If someone could really be harmed so badly by trying to stay young." She looked at Adana's face, really looked at it, not flinching away, forcing herself to see. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "Not anymore. Not physically," Adana replied. "But in other ways, yes. It hurts to know that I did this to myself. It hurts to see my children struggle to look at me. It hurts to become a cautionary tale instead of the ageless beauty I thought I would be." Kayamika was quiet for a long moment, tears now falling freely down her perfect young cheeks. "I am so afraid of getting old," she finally whispered. "I am 26, and already I can see the first line starting. My boyfriend says I should take care of it now, before it gets worse. He has offered to pay for the procedure. He says he is investing in our future together." Adana felt something shift inside her, something that had been bent finally straightening. She reached out and gently took Kayamika's chin in her scarred hand, tilting the girl's face up to look directly at her. "Listen to me carefully," Adana said, and her voice carried an authority born of suffering. "A man who wants you to change your face is not investing in your future. He is trying to own it. The lines on your face are not flaws. They are proof that you have lived, that you have smiled and frowned and expressed a full range of human emotion. They are maps of your journey, and anyone who asks you to erase them is asking you to erase yourself." She released Kayamika's chin and gestured to her own ruined face. "Look at me. Really look. This is what happens when you value what others think of your face more than you value your own wholeness. This is what happens when you believe the lie that youth is more valuable than wisdom, that appearance is more important than essence. I tried to stop time, and time destroyed me. Do not make the same mistake." Kayamika stared at her, and slowly something in her expression shifted. "What should I do?" she asked, and the question was real desperate. "Go home," Adana said firmly. "Look in the mirror at your beautiful 26-year-old face with its few tiny lines. Thank your face for the 26 years it has served you faithfully. Promise it that you will honor it, care for it, but never betray it by trying to make it into something it is not. And then take the money your boyfriend offered you for surgery and use it to leave that boyfriend, because any man who wants to surgically alter you is not a man who loves you." The girl's eyes widened, but she nodded slowly, as if hearing something she had known all along but needed permission to acknowledge. She thanked Adana, hugged her carefully, and left. Adana watched her go, and felt something she had not felt in over a year. Useful. Her suffering had just prevented someone else's suffering. Her nightmare had just saved someone else from the same nightmare. Her face, ruined as it was, had just done something her perfect preserved face never could have done. It had told the truth that saved a life. That was the first, but it was not the last. Word spread, as word does in Lagos, about the woman with the scarred face who talked young women out of cosmetic surgery. They began to seek her out. These girls and women who stood at the same crossroads where Dana had once stood. Some came with their mothers, some with their friends, some alone with their fear and their hope and their dangerous desire to stop time. Adana met with them all, showed them her face without shame, told them her story without embellishment, and gave them the one thing no advertisement for cosmetic surgery could provide: the truth about the cost. 2 years after her face fell apart, Adana opened what she called a School of Scars in a small rented room in a commercial building in Yaba. It was not literally a school, and it was not only about scars, but the name captured something essential about what she was trying to create. A place where women could come to learn from those who have been wounded by the beauty industry. A place where scars were credentials rather than shameful secrets. A place where the truth about aging and beauty and self-worth could be spoken without the glossy lies of marketing. She was not alone in this work. Obioma, the young dermatologist who had treated her with traditional remedies during her healing, joined her as the medical advisor. Dr. Decaying, the plastic surgeon who had documented her case, volunteered his time to give talks about the risks of experimental procedures and how to identify unethical cosmetic surgeons. And women who had their own stories of botched procedures, of beauty standards that had harmed them, of the long journey back to self-acceptance, came forward to share their experiences. On the walls of that small room, Adana hung photographs, not the airbrushed, filtered, perfect images that filled social media, but real photographs of real women's faces showing the full range of human aging. Faces with wrinkles and age spots. Faces with scars from accidents or violence. Faces marked by illness or hardship. Faces that had lived full lives and bore the evidence of that living in every line and mark. Beneath each photograph was a story, not of tragedy and regret, though some contained those elements, but of resilience and wisdom, of what each mark on each face represented in terms of survival and growth and the accumulation of experience that is the real gift of aging. The School of Scars offered workshops on topics like deprogramming beauty standards, the psychology of aging in a youth-obsessed culture, and learning to see your face as your friend rather than your enemy. They brought in therapists who specialized in body image issues, traditional healers who taught about honoring the body as sacred, and even a few reformed cosmetic surgery marketers who confessed how they had manipulated women's insecurities for profit. But the most powerful part of the program was always when Adana stood before a new group of women, showed them her face in full light with no attempt to hide or minimize the scarring, and told them her story from beginning to end. The desperate desire to stay young, the $250,000 spent, the 4 months of perfection, the disintegration, the pain, the isolation, the loss, the slow journey back to something like wholeness. "I cannot give you back the years I wasted hating my wrinkles," she would tell them, "or the money I spent trying to erase them, or the relationship I damaged with my husband and children because I was so consumed by fear of aging. But I can give you what I learned, that the face you are born with, the face that changes and ages and marks your journey through life, is the only face you need, not because it is perfect, but because it is yours." She would pause, letting them look at her, letting them sit with the discomfort of seeing someone so visibly damaged by the pursuit of beauty. "People look at me now and they see a cautionary tale," she would continue. They see what happens when vanity goes wrong, when you trust the wrong doctor, when you try to cheat nature. And yes, I am all those things. But I am also something else. I am proof that you can survive your own worst mistakes. I am proof that there is life after the death of beauty, that identity can be rebuilt on something more solid than appearance, that you can learn to live in and even love a face that the world considers ruined. The impact of School of Scars spread beyond that small room in Yaba. Media outlets began to cover Adana's story, though she was careful to control the narrative, insisting that any photographs show her face clearly rather than blurred or hidden, that her full story be told rather than sensationalized. She gave interviews to newspapers and radio stations, and even appeared on a popular television talk show, sitting across from the host with her scarred face in full view of the cameras, speaking calmly and honestly about what she had done and why. The response was overwhelming. She received letters from women across Nigeria and beyond, from women in Ghana and Kenya and South Africa, from women in the United States and United Kingdom and Brazil, all of them thanking her for her courage in showing them what they needed to see. Many of them shared their own stories of cosmetic procedures gone wrong, of Botox that had frozen their faces into permanent grimaces, of fillers that had migrated and created lumps and asymmetries, of liposuction that had left them with permanent nerve damage, of breast implants that had ruptured and leaked toxic materials into their bodies. And she received letters from younger women, girls really, who were just beginning to notice the first signs of aging and were terrified of what was to come. These were the letters that broke Adana's heart and strengthened her resolve simultaneously. So many of them were where she had been at 47, standing at the crossroads between acceptance and resistance, trying to decide whether to age naturally or to fight time with every tool that modern medicine and money could provide. To each of them, Adana wrote back personally, her scarred hands shaping words on paper that her ruined face had earned the right to speak. You are enough. You are always enough. You will always be enough. The lines on your face are not your enemy. Time is not your enemy. The only enemy is the voice in your head that tells you your value decreases as your age increases. That voice is lying to you, and I am living proof of where listening to that voice can lead. For years after the surgery that destroyed her face, Adana stood in the same graduation hall where the first piece of her synthetic skin had fallen off, watching her daughter receive her medical degree. But this time, she was not sitting in the audience trying to hide her disintegrating face. She was on the stage, having been invited to give the commencement address to the graduating medical students. It was Amara who had arranged it, Amara who had insisted to university administration that her mother's story was one these new doctors needed to hear, Amara who had finally come to terms with what happened to her mother and found a way to transform family tragedy into professional purpose. Amara herself was specializing in dermatology with a focus on the ethical practice of cosmetic medicine, determined to be the kind of doctor who would never do to another woman what Dr. Okonkwo had done to her mother. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of young faces about to enter the medical profession, Adana felt a peace she had never expected to find. Her face was still scarred, still marked by what she had done to herself. But the scars no longer felt like shame. They felt like credentials, like proof that she had survived, like a map of a journey that had taken her from vanity through disaster to something like wisdom. Future doctors, she began, her voice steady and clear. I want to talk to you about the Hippocratic oath you will take today, particularly the part about first, do no harm. I want to talk to you about what happens when the pursuit of profit convinces doctors to ignore that oath, to offer procedures that are experimental and dangerous, to prey on human insecurity rather than healing human illness. She paused, turning her scarred face slowly from side to side so everyone in the audience could see it clearly under the bright lights. This is what happens when a doctor prioritizes innovation over safety, when they treat the human body as a laboratory for their experiments, when they make promises that cannot keep the patients desperate enough to believe them. This is what happens when medicine becomes a business that trades on fear rather than a calling that serves health. She saw some of the graduating students lean forward, others shift uncomfortably, but all of them were listening, really listening. I do not tell you my story to make you afraid of cosmetic medicine, she continued. There are legitimate, ethical uses for plastic surgery, repairing injuries, correcting true deformities, helping people whose appearance has been altered by disease or accident. What I am here to warn you about is the industry that has grown around cosmetic procedures, an industry that creates insecurity in order to sell solutions, that pathologizes natural aging, that treats women's faces and bodies as problems to be fixed rather than as vehicles for living full lives. She spoke for 20 minutes, telling them about Dr. Okonkwo and his clinic in Dubai, about the proprietary compound that had been injected into her face, about the 4 months of perfection followed by the nightmare of disintegration. She told him about the desperation that had driven her to seek such a procedure, about the cultural messages that had taught her to fear aging more than she feared experimental medical treatment. And she told him about the long journey back to wholeness, about learning to live with a ruined face in a culture that values beauty above almost everything else. You are about to become healers, she concluded, and that means you will have power over people in their most vulnerable moments. They will come to you seeking relief from pain, both physical and psychological. Some of them will come to you seeking relief from the pain of aging, from the fear of becoming invisible, from the terror of losing their beauty, and with it their value. And you will have the power to help them or to harm them, to offer genuine healing or to profit from their insecurity. She gripped the edges of the podium, leaning forward slightly, making eye contact with as many of the young faces as she could. I am asking you, begging you, to choose healing over profit, to tell patients the truth about the limits of medicine and the dangers of experimental procedures, to help them understand that aging is not a disease that needs to be cured, but a natural process that should be supported and honored, to be the kind of doctors who, first, do no harm, even when doing no harm means refusing to do a lucrative procedure. The silence in the hall when she finished was profound, broken only by the sound of someone in the back row beginning to clap. Then others joined, and within seconds the entire graduating class was on their feet, applauding not just for her speech but for her survival, for her courage in standing before them with her ruined face and her hard-earned wisdom. Amara, sitting in the front row with her classmates, was crying openly, tears streaming down her beautiful young face as she clapped for her mother. When the ceremony ended and families gathered to celebrate, Amara pushed through the crowd and threw her arms around Adana, holding her tightly. "Thank you, Mummy," she whispered. "Thank you for turning what happened to you into something that might prevent it from happening to others. Thank you for not hiding. Thank you for being brave." Adana held her daughter, feeling the warmth of her embrace, the acceptance in it, the love that survived everything her vanity had put them through. Over Amara's shoulder, she could see Emeka standing with Chitty, both of them smiling at her with pride rather than pity, with respect rather than revulsion. Her family had not just survived a disaster. They had emerged from it stronger, more honest, more connected than they had been before. "I am not brave," Adana said quietly to her daughter. "I am just someone who made a terrible mistake and decided to learn from it rather than hide from it. That is not bravery. That is just choosing to live honestly with the consequences of your choices." But even as she said it, she knew that was its own kind of bravery, the hardest kind maybe. The courage not to have a perfect face, but to show your imperfect face to the world anyway. To not hide your scars, but to display them as evidence of survival. To not pretend you have all the answers, but to share the lessons learned from getting everything wrong. 6 years after the surgery, Adana received a phone call from an international law firm based in London. Dr. Chidi Okonkwo, they informed her, had been arrested in Singapore on charges of medical malpractice and fraud. He had continued his experimental procedures in various countries, always moving before regulatory authorities could shut him down, always finding new patients desperate enough to trust him. But finally, after a woman in Dubai had died from complications related to a proprietary facial compound, police had tracked him down. Now, the law firm was building a case against him and against the clinics that had enabled his work, and they were looking for victims willing to testify. Would Adana be willing to share her medical records, photographs, and testimony? She sat in her living room for a long time after that call, holding the phone in her scarred hands, thinking about justice and revenge, and whether there was any difference between them. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to see Dr. Okonkwo held accountable for what he had done to her and to how many other women she would never know about. But another part of her, the part that had grown during the long years of healing, wondered whether pursuing legal action would help her continue to heal or would lock her in the past, forever defined by what had been done to her. She discussed it with Emeka, who surprised her by advising caution. "It is your choice," he said, "but I want you to think carefully about what you would be signing up for. Testify in a trial like that could mean years of depositions, cross-examinations, having to relive the trauma over and over. It could mean having your photograph shown in court, having your choices and your psychology analyzed by lawyers trying to prove that you were somehow responsible for what happened to you. Are you prepared for that?" She discussed it with Amara, who had a different perspective. "He is still out there hurting people, Mama," her daughter said passionately. "Even if he is arrested now, who knows what will happen in the legal system? Your testimony could help put him away, could prevent him from ever doing this to anyone else. You talk about turning your suffering into something meaningful. This could be part of that." In the end, Adana decided to testify, but not for revenge or even for justice in the legal sense. She decided to testify because her story, told under oath in a court of law, would create a public record of what Dr. Okonkwo had done, a record that would exist forever, warning future women about the dangers of experimental cosmetic procedures and unethical practitioners who prey on insecurity. The trial took place in Dubai, where Dr. Okonkwo's clinic had been based and where the woman who died had received her treatment. Adana flew there with Emeka beside her, returning for the first time to the city where her nightmare had begun. Walking through the airport, past the gleaming shops and the advertisements featuring impossibly beautiful faces, she felt a strange disconnection, as if this were a dream she had already woken from, a story that happened to someone else. The courtroom was smaller than she had expected, more bureaucratic, and less dramatic than the courtroom she had seen on television. Dr. Okonkwo sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, his face as unnaturally smooth as she remembered, though she could see now the subtle wrongness she had missed before. The way his expressions did not quite reach his eyes, the way his skin moved too uniformly, as if it were a single piece of fabric rather than complex layers of living tissue. When their eyes met across the courtroom, she expected to feel anger or fear. Instead, she felt something closer to pity. Here was a man who had become so obsessed with defeating age that he had turned himself into his own experiment, and in doing so had lost something essentially human. He looked ageless, yes, but he also looked lifeless, preserved like a specimen in a jar rather than a living, changing, growing person. Adana's testimony lasted 3 days. The prosecution had her walk through every detail of her experience. Her initial consultation with Dr. Okonkwo, the promises he had made, the waiver she had signed without fully understanding, the procedure itself, the 4-month of apparent success, and then the catastrophic failure. They showed photographs of her face at each stage, before the surgery, immediately after, during the disintegration, and as it looked now, and each photograph was projected onto a large screen where everyone in the courtroom could see. It was excruciating, not because of shame. Adana had moved beyond shame, but because reliving it in such clinical detail forced her to confront how desperate she had been, how willing to believe promises that her rational mind should question, how ready to gamble with her health for the possibility of preserved youth. The defense attorney, a sharp woman in her 40s who ironically showed no signs of cosmetic work despite representing someone who pushed such procedures, tried to establish that Adana had been properly informed of the risks, that she had signed waivers acknowledging the experimental nature of the treatment, that she had been warned the procedure was not reversible. "Mrs. Okafor," the attorney said, her voice professionally neutral, "you are an educated woman, correct? You attended university?" "Yes," Adana replied. "And you read the consent forms before signing them?" "I did. And those consent forms explicitly stated that Dr. Okonkwo's technique was proprietary and experimental, that long-term effects were unknown, that there were risks including potential disfigurement. Is that correct?" Adana took a breath, remembering Emeka's warning about how the defense would try to shift responsibility onto her. "The form said those things, yes. But Dr. Okonkwo told me verbally that the procedure was perfected, that he had performed it hundreds of times with no failures. He showed me photographs of satisfied patients. He said my face would maintain its youthful appearance forever with no negative effects. His verbal assurances contradicted what the legal form said, and I believed the man rather than the paper." "But you chose to believe him," the attorney pressed. "Despite the written warnings, you chose to proceed. I chose to believe in a doctor, Adana said, and her voice was steady now, clear. I chose to believe someone who claimed to have medical expertise and ethical standards. I chose to believe that someone who called himself a healer would not knowingly harm me. Yes, I was desperate. Yes, I was foolish. Yes, I should have questioned more, investigated more, been more skeptical. But the person truly at fault is the one who exploited that desperation, who made promises he could not keep, who experimented on human faces without proper oversight or testing, who prioritized profit and professional glory over patient safety. She turned to look directly at Dr. Okonkwo, forcing him to meet her eyes. I own my part in what happened to me, she said, but he must own his part too. And his part is that he knowingly performed experimental procedures on vulnerable women, that he misrepresented the level of safety in testing, that he disappeared when things went wrong rather than helping his patients deal with the consequences. That is not the behavior of a legitimate doctor. That is the behavior of a con artist who happened to have a medical degree. The courtroom was silent. The defense attorney opened her mouth to ask another question, then seemed to think better of it and sat down. Over the following weeks, other victims testified. A woman from Saudi Arabia whose face had developed painful cysts that had to be surgically drained repeatedly. A woman from Russia whose facial muscles had become partially paralyzed, leaving her unable to fully close her eyes or form certain expressions. A woman from South Africa whose immune system had begun attacking the synthetic compounds in her face, leading to severe infections that required months of hospitalization. And then there was the family of the woman who had died, a 38-year-old mother of three from Dubai itself who had gone to Dr. Okonkwo seeking to restore what pregnancy and stress had taken from her face. The compounds he had injected had caused an allergic reaction, so severe that her throat had swollen shut. She had died before emergency services could reach her in the recovery room of the clinic, while Dr. Okonkwo and his staff had tried to revive her and then, when they realized they could not, had spent precious minutes hiding evidence and falsifying records before calling for help. The husband testified with a photograph of his wife displayed behind him, a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, frozen forever at 38. She was not vain, he said, his voice breaking. She was not obsessed with youth. She just wanted to feel like herself again after 3 pregnancies had changed her body. She wanted to look in the mirror and recognize the woman she felt like inside. Dr. Okonkwo promised her that was possible, and instead, he killed her. He killed my wife, the mother of my children, because he was more interested in being a pioneer than in being a responsible doctor. The defense tried to argue that the woman's death was an unforeseeable allergic reaction, that Dr. Okonkwo had performed due diligence, that no doctor could predict every possible complication. But the prosecution produced evidence that Dr. Okonkwo had not performed standard allergy testing before procedure, had not had proper emergency equipment on hand, had not been properly credentialed in Dubai, but had been operating on a temporary medical visa that should have limited his activities. Most damningly, they produced communications between Dr. Okonkwo and his financial backers, showing that he had knowingly overstated the safety of the procedures to attract more patients, that he had suppressed reports of complications from earlier patients, that he had moved from country to country, not in search of better facilities, but to stay ahead of medical boards investigating complaints against him. The trial lasted 3 months. In the end, Dr. Okonkwo was convicted on multiple charges: medical malpractice, fraud, manslaughter in the case of the woman who died, and operating without proper credentials. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison and ordered to pay millions in restitution to his victims, though everyone knew that the money would likely never materialize, that his wealth had been hidden in offshore accounts and shell companies, that the legal judgment was more symbolic than practical. But for Adana, the verdict was less important than what happened after the verdict. When the press surrounded her outside the courthouse asking for her reaction, she stood on the steps in the Dubai sunlight, her scarred face visible to every camera, and she spoke not about punishment or revenge, but about responsibility. Dr. Okonkwo is going to prison, she said, and that is appropriate. He harmed people deliberately and systematically. He deserves to face consequences for those actions. But he is not the only one responsible for what happened to me and to the other women who trusted him. We are responsible too, not for being deceived, but for living in a culture that made us so terrified of aging that we were willing to gamble our health and lives to avoid it. She paused, looking directly into the cameras, speaking to all the women who would see this news coverage, who would hear about the trial, who would be standing at their own crossroads trying to decide whether to age naturally or to fight time with medicine. The beauty industry, the media, the advertising that surrounds us every day, all of it teaches women that aging is a failure, that wrinkles are shameful, that looking your age is something to be avoided at all costs. As long as we believe those lies, there will be Dr. Okonkwo's ready to exploit that belief. As long as we treat aging as a disease that needs to be cured, there will be people offering dangerous cures. She touched her scarred face, the gesture unconscious now natural. I cannot undo what was done to me, but I can use what happened to me to tell a different story, to model a different way of being a woman who ages. My face is ruined by conventional beauty standards. But by those same standards, my 47-year-old face before the surgery was also ruined, just beginning to be ruined, starting down the path toward ruin. The standards themselves are a problem, not our aging faces. One reporter, a young woman who could not have been more than 25, called out a question. Mrs. Okafor, do you have a message for women who are considering cosmetic procedures? Adana smiled, expression that pulled at her scars but was genuine nonetheless. I would say this. Ask yourself why you want to change your face. Really ask, honestly. Is it because you're unhappy with how you look? Or because you've been taught to be unhappy with how you look? Is it because your face no longer serves you functionally? Or because it no longer serves the male gaze, the youth-obsessed culture, the beauty standards that were designed to make you feel inadequate, so you would buy products and procedures to fix your supposed inadequacy? She took a breath, organizing her thoughts. If you decide to proceed with a cosmetic procedure after really examining your motivations, then do it safely. Research the doctor extensively. Make sure they are properly credentialed and licensed. Ask to speak with previous patients. Be skeptical of anyone who promises miracles or who claims to have techniques that no one else has. Be skeptical of procedures that are not approved by medical boards in multiple countries. Be skeptical of doctors who operate in medical tourism destinations where regulations are looser. And most importantly, be skeptical of your own desperation, because desperation makes us vulnerable to predators. That evening, footage of Adana's statement went viral on social media. Women around the world shared it, commented on it, tagged their friends in it. Some praised her courage. Some criticized her for not warning against all cosmetic procedures. Some shared their own stories of procedures that had gone wrong or right. But all of them engaged with the fundamental question she had raised. Why are we so afraid of aging that we are willing to risk our health to avoid it? 8 years after the surgery that destroyed her face, Adana stood in front of a mirror in her bedroom, studying her reflection with eyes that had learned to see differently. She was 55 years old now, her natural age plus the 8 years since the disaster. Her face bore the scars of what Dr. Okonkwo had done, yes, but it also bore new lines that had formed naturally in the years since. Lines from smiling, from frowning, from laughing with her family and crying over her struggles and expressing the full range of human emotion that a living face is meant to express. The scars were still there, would always be there, patches of discolored skin where the synthetic compound had destroyed the natural tissue beneath. But time had softened them somewhat, and more importantly, Adana had made peace with them. They were part of her story now, part of who she was, proof of where she had been and what she had survived. Her hair, which she had once dyed religiously to hide any gray, now showed silver strands throughout, particularly at her temples. She had stopped dyeing it 3 years ago, deciding that if she could live with a scarred face, she could certainly live with gray hair. The silver made her look distinguished, she thought, like a woman who had earned her wisdom through hard experience rather than inherited easily. Emeka appeared in the mirror behind her, coming to stand with his hands on her shoulders. He was 60 now, fully gray himself, with lines around his eyes and a softness in his middle that spoke of good living and less time at the gym than he had once maintained. He met her eyes in the reflection and smiled. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking," Adana said slowly, "that I am grateful." He raised an eyebrow. "Grateful? For what happened to your face?" "Not for what happened," she clarified, "but for what it taught me, for what it forced me to learn." for the person I became because of it rather than despite it. She turned to face him directly, taking his hands in hers. I was so lost before, Emeka. I was disappearing into vanity and fear, measuring my worth by my appearance, convinced that aging was a tragedy rather than privilege. What happened to me was terrible, and I would not wish it on anyone, but it woke me up. It forced me to find value in something other than my face. It taught me that suffering can be transformative if you let it be. You transformed it, Emeka said softly. You took something that could have destroyed you and turned it into something that helps other people. The School of Scars has reached thousands of women now. Your story has been told in dozens of countries. You have probably prevented hundreds, maybe thousands of women from making the same mistake you made. That is not just surviving, Adana. That is redemption. Adana felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. Do you know what the strangest thing is? She asked. I am happier now with my ruined face than I ever was when my face was perfect. I am more confident now, more at peace, more comfortable in my skin, damaged as it is, than I was when my skin was smooth and tight and exactly what society told me it should be. Why do you think that is? Emeka asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Because I know who I am now, Adana said simply. I know what I value and what I do not. I know that my worth has nothing to do with whether people find me attractive. I know that aging is not my enemy. I know that time is not something to be fought, but something to be lived through, experienced, allowed to mark me and change me and shape me into whoever I am becoming. She paused and added with a small laugh. And I know that the women who judge me for my appearance are exactly where I was 8 years ago, terrified, desperate, convinced that beauty is everything. I do not need their approval anymore. I do not need anyone's approval except my own, and my own is something I finally have. That afternoon, Adana gave a talk at a women's conference in Lagos, speaking to an audience of over 500 women aged from 20 to 70. She no longer felt self-conscious standing on stage with her scarred face visible to everyone. She no longer wore heavy makeup or special lighting to minimize her disfigurement. She stood there exactly as she was, and she spoke from a place of hard-earned authenticity. I want to talk to you about the tyranny of beauty, she began, and the room went quiet, women leaning forward to hear. Not beauty itself, which is subjective and culturally constructed and ultimately neither good nor bad, but the tyranny, the oppressive rule that beauty imposes on women's lives, the way it dictates our choices and limits our freedom and convinces us that our primary value lies in our appearance. She clicked to show a photograph of herself at 47, before the surgery. This is what I looked like when I decided I could not bear to age naturally. Can you see how terrible I looked? How disfigured I was by the natural process of living for 47 years. The audience laughed, because of course she looked fine in that photograph. Attractive, well-groomed, showing perfectly normal signs of a woman in her late 40s. That was the point. I looked like a 47-year-old woman, Adana continued, which is to say, I looked exactly as I was supposed to look at 47. But I had been taught that looking my age was unacceptable, that visible aging was a failure, that I needed to do whatever it took to maintain the appearance of youth. So I spent $250,000 and underwent an experimental procedure, and this is what it got me. She clicked to the next photograph, one taken at the height of her face's disintegration, and the audience gasped. Even after 8 years, even knowing her story, the image was shocking. A face literally falling apart, patches of synthetic skin separating from natural tissue beneath, a woman caught between what she had been and what she was becoming, belonging fully to neither state. This is what happens, Adana said quietly, when we believe the lie that aging is the enemy, when we are willing to do anything, pay anything, risk anything to avoid looking our age. This is what happens when we let fear drive our decisions instead of wisdom. She advanced through more photographs, showing progression of her healing, the slow journey back to a face that was scarred but stable, damaged but hers. The final image was from that morning, Adana at 55, gray-haired and scarred, smiling genuinely at the camera. I am not going to stand here and tell you that I am glad this happened to me, she said. I am not going to pretend that living with a disfigured face in a culture that values beauty above almost everything else has been easy, or that I do not sometimes wish I could go back in time and make different choices. But I will tell you this. I am more myself now than I ever was when my face was perfect. I am more honest, more grounded, more at peace. I am, in ways that matter more than appearance, more beautiful now than I was then. A hand went up in the audience. A woman perhaps in her 30s with a face that showed signs of careful maintenance. Perfect makeup, probably Botox, possibly fillers. "But Mrs. Okafor," she said, "not all cosmetic procedures are dangerous like the one you had. Some are safe and approved and can really help women feel better about themselves. Are you saying women should never do anything to improve their appearance?" It was a fair question, one Adana had heard many times before. "I am saying," she replied carefully, "that we need to examine why we want to improve our appearance and what we mean by improvement. If you have a feature that causes you genuine distress, that has nothing to do with aging or cultural beauty standards, and you can safely change it, then perhaps that is appropriate. But most cosmetic procedures are not about correcting genuine abnormalities. They are about conforming to narrow beauty standards, about erasing signs of age, about trying to look like someone other than yourself." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The question is not whether you should have the right to modify your appearance. Of course you should. Your body is yours. The question is whether you are making that choice freely, from a place of self-love, or whether you are making out of fear, out of desperation, out of a belief that your value depends on your appearance. And if it is the latter, then no amount of Botox or fillers or surgery will ever be enough. Because the problem is not your face. The problem is a belief system that taught you to hate your face in the first place." 10 years after the surgery, Adana's daughter Amara opened her own dermatology practice with a focus on ethical cosmetic medicine. The clinic's philosophy, printed on every brochure and displayed prominently on the wall, was simple. We enhance what is already beautiful. We never try to stop time. Amara had become one of Nigeria's leading voices for responsible cosmetic medicine, writing articles for medical journals about the psychological screening that should be required before any non-medical cosmetic procedure, about the importance of informed consent, about the long-term effects of various treatments that were often downplayed or ignored in the pursuit of immediate results. She also refused to treat patients who came to her seeking to look decades younger than their age, who wanted to erase all evidence of time from their faces, who viewed aging as a disease to be cured. Instead, she referred them to her mother. The School of Scars had grown beyond that small room in Yaba. It now had locations in Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt, and was expanding to Accra and Nairobi. It offered counseling, support groups, educational workshops, and a database of ethical cosmetic surgeons who had agreed to follow strict protocols about patient screening, informed consent, and refuse and perform unnecessary or experimental procedures. But more than that, the School of Scars had become a movement, a counter-narrative to the beauty industry's message that women's value decreased with age. Women who had been through the program spoke about it with the fervor of religious converts, crediting it with saving them from dangerous procedures, helping them heal from past procedures, or simply giving them permission to age naturally in a culture that made such aging feel like an act of rebellion. Adana, now 60 years old, still ran workshops and gave talks, but she had also begun writing. Her memoir, titled The Face That Time Destroyed, A Journey from Vanity Through Disaster to Wisdom, had become an international bestseller, translated into 30 languages. It was required reading in many medical schools courses on ethics and patient psychology. It was discussed in book clubs and on social media. It was, in ways that Adana had never imagined when she first started writing it, changing the conversation about aging and beauty and women's worth. On the 10th anniversary of her surgery, Adana gave an interview to a major international news outlet. The interviewer, a woman in her 50s who had clearly had significant cosmetic work done on her own face, asked a question that everyone always asked. Do you ever wish it had not happened? If you could go back in time and make a different choice, would you? Adana was quiet for a long moment, really considering the question rather than giving the automatic answer. Finally, she spoke. If I could go back in time, she said slowly, I would not try to convince my younger self not to have the surgery. That woman was not ready to hear that message. She was too desperate, too frightened, too convinced that her worth lived in her face. What I would do instead is go back further, to that 13-year-old girl hiding behind the elephant grass, overhearing women talk about proper shape and improper bodies. I would tell that girl that her worth has nothing to do with her appearance, that beauty is temporary and subjective, and ultimately far less important than character, compassion, courage, wisdom. She paused, touching her scarred face unconsciously. But I cannot go back. None of us can. All we can do is move forward with whatever wisdom we have managed to gain from our suffering, and try to spare others from having to suffer the same way. That is what I am doing with my life now. Not hiding my mistakes, not pretending they did not happen, but using them to light the path for women coming behind me. So you do not regret it? The interviewer pressed. Adana smiled, that expression that pulled at her scars, but was genuine nonetheless. I regret the pain I caused myself and my family. I regret the money wasted. I regret the time lost to vanity and fear. But I do not regret becoming who I am now. And I could not have become this person without going through that experience. So in that sense, no, I do not regret it. I just wish I could have learned the same lessons without paying such a high price. That night, Adana sat in her garden with Emika, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that no cosmetic procedure could improve upon. They were both older now, both marked by time, both carrying the evidence of decades lived in the lines on their faces, and the silver in their hair, and the comfortable silence between them that only long marriage creates. Do you remember, Emika said quietly, that first night after you came home from Dubai, when I did not recognize you at the airport? I remember, Adana said, I am sorry for that. Sorry for my reaction. Sorry for not being more supportive. Sorry for all the ways I contributed to you feeling like you needed to do something so drastic. Adana reached over and took his hand, their fingers interlacing automatically, muscle memory from years of holding hands. You have nothing to apologize for. I made my own choices. I walked into that clinic on my own 2 feet. What happened to me is not your fault. But I could have told you more often that I loved you exactly as you were, Emika insisted. I could have noticed you more, appreciated you more, made you feel seen and valued. Maybe if I had, you would not have felt so desperate. Maybe, Adana acknowledged. Or maybe I would have done it anyway, because the problem was not actually about you or any other person's opinion of me. The problem was about my opinion of myself, about the voice in my head that told me I was not enough. And that voice was planted long before I met you, cultivated by years of cultural messages and family history and personal insecurity. You could not have silenced that voice by loving me better. Only I could silence it, and it took this disaster to finally teach me how. They sat in silence for a while, watching the light fade and the stars emerge. Finally, Adana spoke again. Do you know what I think about sometimes? I think about all the women out there right now, standing where I stood 10 years ago, researching clinics and doctors and procedures, convincing themselves that looking young is worth any risk, any price. I think about how many of them I can reach with my story, and how many I cannot. I think about the ones who will ignore the warnings and proceed anyway, because desperation makes you deaf to reason. And I think about how all I can do is keep telling my truth, keep showing my face, keep reminding women that they're enough exactly as they are. You are saving lives, Emika said firmly. Maybe not all of them, but some, and some is not nothing. No, Adana agreed, smiling into the darkness. Some is not nothing. Some is everything to the women who needed to hear it. Some is worth living with this face for the rest of my life. And in that moment, sitting in her garden with her husband beside her and her scarred face turned up toward the stars, Adana felt something she had not felt in years, perhaps had never fully felt. Complete. Not perfect. Not beautiful by conventional standards. Not young or unmarked or any of the things she had once thought she needed to be. Just complete. Just enough. Just exactly who she was meant to become. This story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of experimental cosmetic procedures and the toxic beauty standards that drive women to dangerous extremes. If you are considering cosmetic surgery, please research thoroughly. Seek multiple medical opinions. Ensure your doctor is properly credentialed, and most importantly, Examine your motivations. Ask yourself whether you are making this choice from self-love or self-hate. The answer to that question matters more than any procedure. Asterisk.